because he's from New Orleans and lived there his entire life, that he hooked up with Habitat for Humanity and chose to work in this way. And this is non-architect designed as such, that basically rebuilt the traditional homes, still with the 5-foot rule and things like that. But I think because people were able to be freer with their living environment because it wasn't designed by a famous architect, right? And the difference was striking. Admittedly, where Make It Right's building, they're not. It's a wasteland already, and they're trying to recreate a community there, so it's a lot harder. This is actually in a community where they've just had lots of these homes knocked down through the hurricane, and they're rebuilding, but people seemed happier. There were actually people on the street, there were people on the verandas chatting to each other and stuff like that, whereas in Make It Right, it was like devoid, a couple of people mowing the lawn, but nobody had kind of done this kind of thing, grown stuff over things, and the Make It Right stuff was already starting to decay because they were under severe cost pressures, so they'd started using materials that would like pine on outside, on external decks and things like that. So the other interesting thing was I came across these houses. Now these were built by a steamboat captain back in the early 1900s, prior to the wood-driven pumping systems that were then used to create the levees, the canal systems through. Now he built 2 homes, one for him and his wife, and then one for his son and his wife. And he built them like steamboats, right? But interestingly enough, during the Katrina event, within I think it was 4 or 5 days after Katrina, the owner of this house he's a very, very wealthy man, some banker or something in Baton Rouge or whatever, but he basically hooked up this house to a generator, had it running again, because it's designed to flood. Like internally, I wasn't able to take photos internally, but internally it's all tiled and brick on the lower level. So this is the levee here, and this is the river, and this is basically 2 minutes bike ride from Make It Right in the 9th Ward, and he had about, I think it was 11 FEMA trailers eventually hooked up to his generator system and things like that. So he was also supporting other families from the area. Timber frame construction encased in ceramic, and yeah, basically you wash it out, keep going about your business, and it worked. And it's worked time and time again. And it was actually built prior to the levee system when the river used to flood consistently. So this wouldn't have existed in the past. He would have just, and he knew the river well. So I mean, they're kind of weird looking houses, and I wouldn't ever, as an architect, kind of try and emulate these things because you just get, it'd be a horrific situation. But that's that's his son's house over the road. And anyway, so this is Windell's area, South Lafourche Levee District. And these are the levees that he builds, and that's something going up at the moment in New Orleans. And so that's that point about the difference. The way he does these things is that he basically digs, and then he just lets the earth dry out, whereas these guys dig and they take it away, and then they bring clean fill back in, which adds a lot of expense. And if we would ever do something in Brisbane, which I'd really like to do, we would be getting this guy, because he's awesome. He really, of all the people around the world that I met, he was the most knowledgeable about flood, without a doubt, in terms of protecting the community, like in a practical kind of way. And that's an evaluation that I basically, I was very impressed with. But he lives in this kind of area, and he said to me, "You've got to go to Grand Isle," which is right down where the Gulf, all the oil rigs. That's what those dots are on the horizon there. They're just sort of 2 or 3 k's off the beach. But this is Grand Isle, and these guys get storm surge, and so this is this whole point of elevation. Again, there was nobody on the ground. Like everybody was up in their homes, and it was just this really weird landscape. This is the levee here from storm surge. They get about, I think, up to 8 metres or something like that, 8 to 9 metres of storm surges. So obviously there's a reason, and I'm not saying that I'm against elevation. I'm saying that I'm also for other ways of doing things as well. And this is Biloxi. Now in Biloxi, this was the most successful project that I saw of the entire trip. And it was by the Gulf Coast Community Design Studio. And it was an architect who, through, I think it was the University of Mississippi, had established himself with a community organisation. And I think Biloxi lost about 2,500 homes due to storm surge. And it was basically to do with the fact that as the water came in, all the houses which were already elevated were just filled up. But the retreat of the water was so rapid that it just ripped the middle out of the homes, and they just sort of, and that's what they ended up like, basically. And this is where it's an interesting situation, because he was designing and building these houses for between 80 and 90,000 US dollars, which is actually affordable. Like, that's basically what a mortgage would be these days in this particular area. He relied quite a lot on volunteer labour from Christian organisations that would send young people down to help out and do whatever. So I'm not sure if you actually factored that in, whether that, you know, they would actually be that affordable. But also the Mississippi region is actually quite depressed economically, so a carpenter gets paid between, an experienced carpenter gets about $15 US an hour. So when you compare that to sort of 45 to 50 Australian dollars an hour here, you can see that labour rates are just so much higher here, therefore things become unaffordable, which pushes us down the path of, you know, prefabrication and all those sorts of things. So there's this whole kind of economic complexity, and so as I was going, I was learning about things. So by the time I got to England, to the UK, I started thinking, well, actually, we really need economists to be on our team as well, because without the economists, how do we know what we're proposing as designers makes sense? Because we could be proposing stuff and designing things that just are completely unaffordable in terms of the grander scheme of things. Anyway, from an affordability point of view, and from working with the storms that like flooding, etc., I thought these houses were actually really good. Then I took off to the Netherlands. My sense of the Netherlands is that, so I stayed in Utrecht, and then I just basically travelled by train all around the place, and I've got some good friends there, so they drove me out to these sorts of areas as well. So I went to Delft, Rotterdam, The Hague, Amsterdam, Maasbol, but basically, in terms of it, the Dutch were the most interested in Brisbane. New Orleans were only interested in the US. They weren't really interested in anything really related to Brisbane, but the Dutch were really interested in Brisbane. And I think, I don't know, I could be wrong here, but it's because they've been really, really, really good at protecting themselves against the sea, but they haven't been very, very good at protecting themselves from the rivers. And they now realise that, because they've got 3 main rivers, the Rhine, Meuse and Severn. Yeah, and so with the ice melt coming down through Germany and Austria, it's causing lots of trouble. But because they have no flood insurance in the country, this is coming from Jos very often. He's saying it's a real political issue, because protection is a Dutch thing, and your government protects you. So if your government can't protect you, then what do you do, kind of thing. So I think this is where Brisbane and the Netherlands can really kind of work really well together. When I went to the UK, they're in a different situation, because they've got lots of old buildings that they just can't raise. So they have all these other things which I'm not. But I think there's a real opportunity with the Dutch. because of that. And this part is basically, actually this is a better one. This is kind of like a cross-section through the Netherlands. There's the sea level. You've got Rotterdam, which is like 6.5 to 7 metres below sea level. No, sorry, that's Amsterdam. This is Rotterdam over here. And then everything else in between. And they've obviously worked out a way of constructing the landscape. So what do they say? God created the world and the Dutch created the Netherlands or something like that. So that's what that was said to me, you know, because they've reclaimed lots of stuff. And each one of these windmills pumps something an extra metre higher than the other. Anyway, it was an excellent, I loved it there, I really did. And the entire society seemed to know a lot about flood and water. And so these are the dikes. There's a summer and a winter dike, or a spring dike, or whatever. Anyway, a dike house. And then this is in Utrecht, where the whole country is obviously used to working with water, which is a really great thing, because it meant that when I went there, people were really interested in what I was interested in. But the problem at the moment is that because they haven't thought about their rivers very much, they're now having to kind of raise their dikes to deal with the flow. But to raise your dike, you've got to then take up a lot of the agricultural land around the dike, and that's politically that's a sensitive issue as well. So anyway, keep moving. They've become known for this particular Maasbommel project, and I think I met with Chris Everberger, who was involved with this when he was at, I think it was Deltaris. Is that right? Chris Everberger.
Chris he's at IHE now.
Yeah, and I think prior to that he did this project for the developer when he was working with them. Great project, but completely unaffordable. And also, it's I think they've now done another one, but it's basically the only one that's actually built outside the dike system. So it's not actually legally allowed to be a permanent dwelling for people, because you can't have permanent dwellings outside the dike system. Because here you get tides, whereas inside the dike system you get a very, very simple sort of, you don't get much variation in terms of the water level. So these are this used to be a camping spot for wealthy people, but because the local government because the river was flooding, they had to raise the dike. And to raise the dike, they then had to basically take the land from the campers, but because the campers had a lot of political force, the government was then convinced by the developer, who was representing the original owner of the land, that they should look at allowing this to occur. And so yeah, it's basically for quite wealthy people. The guy who owned this place, he's the real estate agent, but he lives there, he sort of represents it. He has houses in Spain and Poland and wherever else. But in terms of the technology that went into it, very, very interesting technology. And they call them amphibious homes. Some of them actually are, some of them do float, but not all of them float. I met with Herman Hertzberger. He was great. He's still in his 80s, and still working every day. And he became an architect because of but he participated, similar to Peter actually, when he was a student in the 1952 or 53 floods. In the north, and his whole theory of architecture is based on Le Corbusier freak, right? He loves Le Corbusier. Everything's about pilotis and building up above the ground. And so he was explaining to me how his experiences of flooding actually affected how he saw architecture, and that's in a way how he's kind of approached his architecture. And so it was really, I spent about 3 hours with him, and he was skipping around the place. Like, it was amazing. He was downstairs and upstairs, and he was getting me books, and he was really, really enthusiastic about this kind of work. This one's kind of famous, Nyberg. I was very unimpressed. It was like, it lacked complete creativity as far as I was concerned. It just all looked the same. didn't float. And so I was kind of disappointed in this project. These ones were more interesting because individual architects had designed them themselves for their families, etc., and for clients as well. And that was that's on iBerg. It's basically just over here, kind of thing.
Whereabouts again, James?
Just in Amsterdam.
In Amsterdam.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yep.
So it's all about floating at the moment, it seems. But then when I started presenting the stuff that we've done in Brisbane, people were like, well, actually, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, a lot of the older Dutch homes from 100 years ago were designed to float. And it seems like there's been this kind of push away from that. So, yeah. And this has nothing to do with housing. But when I went to Rotterdam, of all the places I went to, Rotterdam was like, they were leading the way in terms of thinking about this stuff. Like they're really excellent. This is the Urbanistans. And this is, the reason I'm putting this up is because I knew that there were certain people in the audience from local government. And what these guys did was that they convinced their local government, the Rotterdam Municipal Authority, to combine the local infrastructure budget and also the local landscape budget together to create a project that could answer a lot of things. So basically, they've subsequently sent me these ones, but this is what it was looking like when I went there and I took this photo. But basically, when I spoke to Durbaniston, they were talking about creating like a water mall that fills up and slows the path of water, basically. It's not about doing anything other than slowing the path of water down. So the stormwater from all of the buildings around here comes into here, fills this up during a sort of a heavy rain event through channels and etc. etc. And basically that sort of mitigates or helps to mitigate flooding in this particular precinct, general flooding. So they're hoping, and apparently they've done one similar which wasn't as successful, but this one has been, because of the good work that was done in the original one that they did, a bit more money was put into this one, so they think it's going to work quite well. But basically, when it's not raining, it's a basketball court or it's a futsal court or whatever. I mean, Rotterdam, they were excellent. They've got this app which they've developed, and it's all about water projects around the city. So I've got it on my phone, and basically you can click on one of these little blue dots and it comes up with this information about, oh, we did this or we did that. It's all about water. And yeah, what a good thing for Brisbane to have, perhaps. United Kingdom, I was really disappointed with the British. I went to DEFRA. They're just hell-bent on building things in floodplains, and whereas the Scottish, I started in Scotland and did a similar kind of presentation here to local government up there. I think it's 4 to 6% of Scottish properties are actually at risk of flood, whereas in the UK it's something like 24% of properties or whatever. But they still don't seem to kind of understand, and that's why we're now seeing them flooding again, etc., etc. So I went to Bewdley, met with the National Flood Forum there. This is kind of how they've got sort of riverine flooding, various measures at the property level which don't actually work if you've got a lot of water coming at in a short amount of time. So they've got lots of troubles with their older buildings there. And they like the idea of designing things to flood. But then there's a lot of, I met John Party, who used to work with Glenn Murcutt here in Australia, and he's set up back in the UK. He's an excellent architect, and he's really interested in this work as well. This is Backer Architects. They haven't done anything yet, but they've produced a lot of work, and I met with those guys, and I think if they can get their hands on a really wealthy client, then things will work out for them. These guys were more interesting, I thought. It's like a pub that regularly floods. So the whole thing is designed to basically just be pulled out, washed out, put back in, and they just go on about their business. This was the first project and only project that I saw in this community. in the UK that actually work with flood. So it's a community-built project with a local architect. The lower level is designed to flood. It's got big doors, etc., etc. All the habitable spaces, with computers, etc., upstairs. And this is the last slide. So this is in Lewes. It's quite close to Brighton, in the south of the UK, and they've started to realise that on agricultural land, if it's designed in an interesting way, not only can you have animals and crops growing and things, but it can also help to mitigate the path of water. So Lewes, the town here, is actually being protected quite significantly because it regularly floods by good land use planning, and that's the point of that slide. But it doesn't have to look ugly.